Yeah. Okay.
Marines, you can sit in the front. Why not?
Okay, good morning, folks. Please take your seats and we'll get started here promptly. Okay, good morning. My name is Bob Kilmartin, and I'm a retired Marine Colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve after 34 years. About half of those were active duty. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the Veterans Town Hall and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here to recognize and respect the veterans. I think the first thing we'd like to do in keeping the traditions of my organization, the Cape and Veterans Outreach Center, is to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would ask you all to kindly stand and face the flag, and we'll do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the Cape and Islands Veterans Outreach Center. I'm the vice president of that organization, and we have the president, Jim Seymour, here, whom I'll introduce shortly. We are the only veteran-focused nonprofit organization on the Cape and Islands, and we're registered under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Service Code. And our mission is to provide a comprehensive menu of life-sustaining and life-altering services for all veterans of all branches of all wars. In a nutshell, what we aim to do is improve the lives of veterans on the Cape and Islands, generally speaking. And specifically, we offer a host of services, including transitional housing. In fact, we're very proud of the Dennis House. Some of my colleagues, Bill Blaisdell and others are here, raised well over $1 million, all donations to put up the Dennis House on Route 134, which serves, at this point, 5 veterans who would otherwise be homeless. And the idea is we give them about a year to get their affairs, get their act in order, get a job, and try to get back in the game. And then if it doesn't help, then we try to send them somewhere else. But it's not permanent housing, so we are looking down the road to some more permanent situations, but I won't get into that right now. Just suffice it to say we have a lot of projects on the drawing board. And the other thing we provide, of course, is counseling services for PTSD victims, Marines, and other veterans who may have had traumatic brain injuries. And we also have counseling for just life, trying to get through life, financial matters, and so forth. So we provide all sorts of counseling. We have the Grace Center, which is specifically allocated for traumatic brain injuries. And we also, I'm very proud to say, just opened, thanks to Jim, the Veterans Food Pantry, which is right over here on Stevens Street, about a mile away. And that's state-of-the-art. We haven't even had the grand opening. I don't want to steal Jim's thunder, but that's coming up here in a few weeks, and that's a fabulous resource for the entire community. So please avail yourselves, especially veterans. It's something that we're very proud of. We actually have a mobile food pantry. You may have seen the vans out here with the logos for the Cape Veterans Outreach. And thanks to Jim and some of the others here on the Cape Veterans, we now reach out to every nook and cranny of Cape Cod. So if somebody is homebound down in Provincetown or Truro or something, we can get to them and bring them the life-sustaining services, food and whatnot that they need. And also, we provide transportation. We're about to ramp that up, where we can take a disabled veteran or an elderly veteran to their medical appointments in Providence, Rhode Island, for example, or up to Boston, because there's a lot of travel issues involved, especially as we get elderly. You probably all know, you know people anyway. In any event, I would like to thank a few folks here before we get started. And first of all, the Elks for providing the wonderful luncheon. They do that every year, and we're extremely grateful. So in the past year, we've had really what I would describe as explosive growth and improvement with the Cape and Island Veterans Organization, and that's due to a lot of factors, not the least of which is the leadership of the Executive Director, Jim Seymour, who's done yeoman duty, but also his staff. He's brilliant in hiring people such as Brian Weiner, who's here. Brian, raise your hand, please. And I got to tell you, Brian is a force of nature, a one-man task force in terms of outreach and development. So we're extremely grateful. We have a new member of the board, Jim Roach, Dr. Jim Roach, and he's been extremely helpful in fundraising and so forth. We also have some of the ladies in the back, Mary Rose, who's out front. Mary Rose, Rebecca. Rebecca, raise your hand. And Barbara Ann Foley is absolutely terrific on outreach. And a lot of what we do or aim to do is reach out and make it known that we offer this whole panoply of services. The worst thing for us in the world would be if there's some veteran homebound somewhere that needs service and they don't even know about us. So please help us get the word out. Barbara Ann is a force multiplier in that regard, and we're very grateful. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Is Mike Gleason here? Carrie, I'd like to thank Carrie for all the casework that she does. Carrie, raise your hand, please. And of course, Greg Quilty, Major Quilty, U.S. Marine Corps, a former CH-53 pilot. You heard him speak out on the green, and a dear friend and a great asset. I'm going to turn it over to Jim in a minute, and one of the things I would ask is that in terms of brevity or keeping this succinct so that each speaker is dignified and has the time that he or she deserves here today, I would ask all of our speakers to please, I'm emphasizing, keep it to 10 minutes or thereabouts. And we'll try to give you signals, you know, some of them not so subtle, like you remember from the military. But, and I certainly don't mean any disrespect if we give you that signal, because as far as I'm concerned, if you're a combat veteran, you can talk all day, any day you want to. You can talk to me offline, and I will certainly listen. But in fairness to the last guy or lady at the end here, we don't want folks walking out, depriving them. So please be respectful of the time limit. And without further ado then, let me please introduce Jim Seymour, who's been a fantastic executive director, and as I say, we've never been in better shape.
Thanks, Bobby.
Welcome this morning again. This is a impressive collaboration between our organization and the town of Barnstable. Coordinating the events outside and listening to Staff Sergeant Dinan, Major Quilty, and others, and recognizing and acknowledging the work that has been accomplished to keep freedom free, and it really isn't free. There's a lot of sacrifice that has gone into that, and will continue to go into that so that it ensures what we do. So just by way of a brief introduction of who I am, so I'm the executive director. And a year ago, I was sitting where you were sitting, and it hadn't been announced yet that I was going to be the executive director of this organization. I knew it, the board president knew it, and no one else knew it. And we couldn't say anything. And I sat there last year and remarked that was my why. How I became the executive director, I was on the board for about 3.5 years prior to being appointed the executive director. So I had an inside knowledge of the organization, its values, its mission, all of the things. And I kind of joked with others. I had the inside track on what you would want to do if you were interviewing for a leadership position in an organization like this. And how I came to it, one night I was sitting home as a board of director with the job description, sitting with my chocolate lab, Max, and we were reading the description. He can read. He definitely can read. And my wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking at a job description." She said, "Let me see that." She hands it back to me in about 30 seconds and said, "You know you're an idiot?" I said, "I've heard that before." She said, "This job is tailor-made for you." And with her encouragement, I became the executive director a year ago this week. So it's really kind of awesome to be on this end of it. I'm a Navy veteran. I was a reservist. I was a chaplain. I was part of the Archdiocese of Boston, and I retired probably about 15 years ago. And I was talking with Father Divine early this morning before the events outside, and this is my why now. This is ministry. You know, Billy and I were talking about deck plate ministry, and for those of you that have been in the military, you understand what deck plate is, and that's what this job is all about for me. I have an impressive staff. I sit in the office, corner office. Sometimes they let me out, sometimes they don't. But they do the job day in and day out, and Bob highlighted them, and they're here, they're dressed in red, and Brian Wiener, my development manager, makes it rain impressively. My number 2 right-hand man, Mike Gleason. Mike is an Army vet. Part of his team is Danny Sullivan. Danny is an Army vet. Danny's part of the 3rd Regiment. He did duty at Arlington National Cemetery as a caisson officer. Those of you in the military know what that entails. I have on my left my fabulous program and outreach manager, Barbara Ann Foley, and she's brought on Rebecca Hopwood, and they're just out there making impressive inroads. You know, there's no master list of veterans. You have to find them. So they're out there. That's their task, and that's their mission. All right? Our brand new case manager, Carrie Dobson. Carrie is an Air Force veteran, a mental health specialist, and she's growing our case management program phenomenally. Carrie, thank you so much. And the longest serving member in the organization is the face of the organization in its truth, and it's Mary Rose Hofstadt, who is our administrative person, who sits out front and answers the phone and knows more about taking care of veterans than anybody such as myself. Mary Rose, thank you. You know, when you join an organization such as this as an executive director, you look at what your board of directors complexion looks like. I have 24 members of a board. That's kind of daunting, but they are so committed. You know, Mike Dunford could not be here today. He's our board president, and he sends you his greetings. And Bob Kilmartin is our vice president, Bill Blaisdell, our treasurer. I see Dr. Ann Skopek is our board member. Am I missing anybody else on the board? Is that everybody? Jim Roach. I'm sorry, Jim is one of our newest members of the board, and look forward to working with him. Most importantly, I want to thank each of you for being here, and I really thank our partnership with Betsy and Kevin from the Elks. You are amazing people. Not only, thank you. You know, not only do they help support us in this event, they help us at Thanksgiving, as we're going to feed in excess of 100 families this year for Thanksgiving. 100 families this year for Thanksgiving. Amazing. You know, when you look at the future of our country and things like that, I'm starting to become an old man. Didn't think about it until I started looking at these young Marines, and I'm going, damn, I'm real old. Could I ask those young Marines to stand, please? And I have to tell you, there's some impressive salad bars there. Let me tell you, you folks have done a yeoman's share. You've really been very busy and accomplished. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. Yeah, you usually don't get that when you're a flag, and if you know what that means. But congratulations. Please be seated. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to thank the Matakees 6th grade. Those cards that you see on your chairs were from the 6th grade of Mattakey School in Yarmouth, and they're thanking veterans for their service. Could I ask all the veterans in the room to please stand? I want to recognize you. You know, we continue today what Jack Benino started 5 years ago. I saw Jack outside. Did he make it inside? Did Jack make it in? Oh, there you are. Jack, thanks. Come on in. Say hi. And I just noticed another board member, Mark Goldberg, snuck in on me. Mark, thanks for coming. You know, as people ask me, what does a veteran mean? And how do you become a veteran? Well, it led me to write just a brief reflection that I asked the local media to publish. I'm not sure if it's been published, but I want to share with you what I have penned in this. And it's veterans who have served our country in the U.S. military, Coast Guard, or National Guard, whether it be a brief time or a full 20-plus year career, active duty or reserve share one thing in common. Each of us raised our right hand and swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of our country, its people. Many sacrifices were made to fulfill this oath, including time away from families. In our nation's, some physical injuries, some minor, and some exceptionally debilitating. Thank you. As well as PTSD, and in certain times, unfortunately, in our nation's history, total disdain for the uniform. Yet, if you ask most any veteran, would they raise their right hand and do it all over again? A resounding yes would be their major response. I ask you for one thing. If you are a veteran and need help, please come see us. If you are a veteran and know another veteran that needs assistance, please come see us. Just wanted to leave you with this final line from President Reagan. He spoke these words: "Veterans know better than anyone else the price of freedom, for they've suffered the scars of war. We can offer them no better tribute than to protect what they have won for us, this country of ours." Please take time today to thank veterans for you encounter for their service. And please know there are many agencies to help you, fellow veterans. And on behalf of our organization, to my fellow veterans, I want to thank each of you for your service. I'd like to turn it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Bob Kilmartin, to continue the program. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, our first speaker will be Mr. William Bill Blaisdell, who's a personal friend, a member of the board of directors, and I can tell you, I don't know of anybody, any single person who's done more for veterans on the Cape and Islands than Bill Blaisdell. Bill is a veteran of the U.S. Army, served as a combat medic in Vietnam, and was awarded the Bronze Star for his service. The Bronze Star indicates that a soldier has distinguished him or herself by heroic or meritorious achievements in service. Bill, come on up, please.
Get rid of all this trash.
Good morning. As Bob said, I'm Bill Blaisdell. I was a combat medic in the U.S. Army. I served from 1968 to 1970, and I was in Vietnam from 1969 to 1970. Before I move forward, I'd like to thank a few people. First, Bob, for emceeing this event today, Jim Seymour. And I'm not going to go through everybody on Jim's staff because they've already been recognized and I'll probably miss somebody anyway. But also the town of Barnstable for co-hosting this event, and Greg Quilty, who is the Veteran Service Officer for the entire Cape, who also co-hosted the event. I've talked at this event for the last 4 years, and when Barbara Ann Foley, who actually set this all up, asked me to speak, I said, I think I might be running out of material because this is my 5th time. But I think I can come up with one story that I don't believe I've ever shared. And it was when I was in Vietnam, I was in a field hospital, aid station, if you will. And I was the only one on duty that particular day. Everyone else was on call, but it was a very slow day, one of the very few slow days we ever had. And I was sitting in the treatment tent, and I got the communications people came up and said they just got a radio message from a medevac that they were bringing in a severely burned veteran who had been in a tank, and the tank caught fire, and he kind of baked in the tank. And he was very, very serious, and they'd be in about 20 minutes. So I left the aid tent and went to my commanding officer's tent, and he lived underground. Unlike us enlisted people, we had to live upstairs. And I told him that we had a seriously injured burn victim coming in and I might need his help. He was a medical doctor, and he said he'd be right over, and I went back, and then they landed. They brought this soldier in. He was burned probably over about 90% of his body. And the medics on the medevac helicopter were unable to start an IV because he was so severely damaged. And my commanding officer and I attempted to do an IV, and we were unable, so we had to do a medical procedure where we did a cut down, and we were able to get a line in and start an IV and put him on a saline drip and morphine for the pain. He was screaming the whole time because he was in so much pain. And once we did that, we covered almost his entire body with Vaseline gauze to protect from dehydration and infection. And my commanding officer went back to his tent, and I was waiting. We had to wait. It seemed like forever to get an evac to get him transferred to a surgical hospital in Saigon. And he was in so much pain. He was crying and moaning and begging me to help him. And I had given him as much morphine as I thought I could give him. So I went back to my commanding officer and I said, I need to give him more morphine. And he looked at the chart that I showed him and he said, I can't authorize that. And I said, this guy is going to die in pain. I said, I think we both can agree he's probably going to die, and I don't want him to die in pain. And he said, well, I can't authorize that. He said, you go back there and do what you think you need to do. I took that. He and I had a very, very good relationship. He trusted me. He believed that I was very professional and I knew what I was doing. And he just didn't want to sign a paper to do what I was about to do. So I came back and I administered more morphine, and not enough to euthanize the soldier, but enough to make sure that he was not going to die in pain. And he did not die, and he said to me, am I going to die? And I said, not on my watch. But I said, I'm going to do something right now, and it's going to probably put you to sleep. You're not going to die. And he said, thank you. And that was the last he spoke to me. He left on a medevac about 40 minutes later, and they got him to Saigon, and he didn't make it. He passed 2 days later in Saigon. My company clerk was able to track those kinds of things. So that was the one story that I maybe have never told before. The other thing I wanted to say today is it was very difficult in Vietnam to communicate with family. It's not like today's times. There was no such thing as internet. There was no such thing as FaceTime or satellite phones. We didn't have any of that. The only communication we had with our family and friends back home was the mail. And the mail was always like 2 or 3 weeks between the time you sent something or between the time you sent something or they sent something to you before you or they could read it. So it was a completely different time. And by the time I would read letters from my mother or my father, brother or sisters, it was things that happened weeks ago. I had a close relative pass away, and by the time I got the letter that he had passed away, he was already buried and it was over. So, and I'm not trying to minimize what goes on in today's world and the soldiers that serve in war zones. I'm just trying to point out that back in Vietnam days, it was really kind of crazy with communications. And one thing I wanted to share, and am I getting close to time? Was my mother wrote me a letter, and it was the first letter I got when I was in Vietnam. And I kept it. This is the actual letter that she wrote. I was able to, I don't know how I ended up being able to salvage this letter, but every time I had a rough day, I would pull that letter out and read it. And I transcribed it, and I've got a lot of typos in here, but I wanted to share this with everyone. This is what I can't read it because it's too emotional for me, but every time I had a tough day, I would pull this letter out and I'd read it. And it got me through some really, really tough times. That's all I have to say today. Thank you very much for listening.
Little token of our appreciation for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Folks, before I introduce the next speaker, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize a distinguished veteran in the crowd with us who's also a legend in the local community. I know this from my days as a prosecutor in district court here in Barnstable. He's the face of Toys for Tots on Cape Cod, and I know everybody, the Marines especially. Brian Morrison, please stand up, sir. And Officer Morrison. Yep. Thank you. I guess Brian, turns out, is my next speaker, too. So he's a veteran of the United States Navy who served on the USS Nicholson, stationed in the Persian Gulf. While in the Navy Reserves, Brian transferred into the Navy Seabees and was activated 3 times to serve in the Iraq Middle East Theater. He served from 1989 to 2015 as a gun runner's mate 2nd class. So come on up, Brian, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I have an hour to speak, I think. But,
You also got a gun,
thank you all for being here. The last speaker hit the nail right on the head when he spoke of family. Yes, we wear the medals. We go off to battle. But without the families back home holding down the fort, the mothers, the wives, brothers and sisters, we couldn't do it without them, and that's why we do it, so that they can maintain their freedom. So thank you to the families forthwith, and all the veterans here today, too. So thank you all for that. As you know, my name is Brian Morrison. I'm a police officer now here in Barnstable, going on my 20-something year. But I owe the military, really, for where I am today. In high school, born and raised here in Barnstable, I played football for Barnstable High School. I was hurt in my junior year. I actually had a scholarship to go play football. Slippery Rock University, I lost that scholarship. So upon graduation, the following year, I was at Crossroads, so I had no idea what I wanted to do. My father's an Army vet, God rest his soul. My brother's a Marine, and my uncle was Air Force. So we had a work day, or a day where people came in for career day, as we call them. And I spoke to all the services, and the one that really got through to me was the gentleman from the Navy. He told me the truth. He said, you're going to absolutely hate it, you're going to love it, but you're going to have a great adventure. So 3 days after I graduated high school, I was in boot camp at what we call Great Mistakes. It's actually Great Lakes, Illinois. Probably as a young person, it was probably one of the toughest things I had to do. But I graduated, and 3 days before I left boot camp, the commanding officer came to me and said, today's your lucky day. I'm like, why is that, sir? He's like, young sailor, you're off to the USS Constitution. So that was my actual first tour of duty right out of boot camp. And it was the most amazing duty I did. I drove the CO around and just met all kinds of wonderful people in the military. And it's just, from there, it was awesome. After leaving the USS Constitution, the Persian Gulf War started. So that's when I went to the USS Nicholson out of Charleston, South Carolina, and did I don't know how many tours in the open ocean. A lot of fun, but being from the Cape, I was used to water, so it was fun. After my service in the active duty, the military really stood by me, helped me out. I went right into the reserves, and I became a police officer. But during my times in the military, I learned how to help people, volunteer myself, and that's why I do the things I do now. Those of you who know me, I'm in the Elks, in the Kiwanis Club, the NAACP, No Place for Hate. You name the organization, I'm probably in it, or the president. Because every time you miss a meeting, you become the president. So, but the military really paved my way to do the things that I can do today. And it's just schooling, education, another great aspect. So for you young Marines, if you want to do great things, stay with the military service, and tell you, they pay for my education. Matter of fact, I just got my master's degree this year. So, thank you. Even at my older age, never too young to, or never too old to learn, right? But it's just, again, with the family and such, it's been a great help for me to be in the military. A lot of friends, Rob Dynan, who spoke earlier, great job, Rob. He and I have been friends for 20 years, at least now, and now we work together, helping the young people in the community, doing a boot camp for kids in the summertime. So I like to pay it forward. The military did such a great thing, and the Navy especially did such a great thing for me. I like to pay it forward and, give all what I can back to, not only the military, but back to this community right here. Because it starts small, you have to give back to the community. And I believe it was Mr. Quilty said earlier, or was it somebody said about being the best volunteers and such. It's the truth. I mean, you learn to help people, and it just the veterans here. Veterans Day is again about us veterans, but it's also about all those that support us, and you included. Thank you for being here today, and I want to say, keep thanking a veteran, and as Rob said, say it more than words. Shake a hand, buy a cup of coffee, whatever, but just reach out to the veterans, because without them protecting our freedom, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you.
With a token of our appreciation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So again, Brian, thank you for being a role model, not only in the military, as evidenced by your fruit salad, but in the community here afterwards. And shameless plug here for Toys for Tots, December 7th at Gannon's. If anybody wants to go by in the evening, drop off a toy and have a drink, we would love to see you. So that's December 7th. Of course, yeah. So thank you again. So the next speaker will be Joseph McAleer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. McAleer, sorry, sir. Anyway, Joseph is a Korean War veteran who served in the Army at the tail end of World War II and the beginning of the Korean War. Joe was a rifle instructor in the Army specializing in the M1 rifle and served in transportation and the Corps Theater as part of a stage crew. He also served in the PX train that provided supplies for the soldiers in Korea. So please welcome Joe McAleer. Nice to meet you, sir. Do you want to sit down? You want to hang on? Okay, all right.
Well, good morning, people. Buenos dias. And welcome. Oh. Well, they made me write out my speech, so here it is. And now I'll give you my version. Anyhow, the whole story starts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where my buddies, Welshie and Mole, they had already enlisted in the service. And so Smitty, who was also a buddy, he was about to go down and enlist in the Army himself. Well, I couldn't do that, because these were my buddies, and I hung out with them, and they were all gone. So I went down and I enlisted myself. That worked great. 8 weeks in Camp Lee, Virginia, of basic training, and then 1 week in Philadelphia on leave, and then was on to the Swallow, USS Swallow, and off to Korea. And we landed in Incheon, and I was transported to Seoul, where I was placed in transportation. Well, my buddies and I, we were drinking a little beer one night. We weren't drunk, but we were pretty high. And I thought, well, I'll check out a 3/4-ton truck, and we'll shoot out the Kimpo Air Force Base. Okay. Well, let me back up for just a moment and tell you about a little bit what the Army did in Seoul. They had installed a 25-mile-per-hour speed zone in the city of Seoul. And I had driven for 2 months and collected 2 speeding tickets, which I paid for out of my big salary of $78 a month. That was fine, except that they also tacked on there that for a 3rd ticket, you not only paid for it, but it was 3 months in Pongsong, which was the local jail. I didn't want any part of that. No. All right, so back to Kimpo again. We're on the road. We're just about getting on the road to Kimpo, and I thought I would kind of see what the 3/4-ton truck would do. So I kind of showered down a little bit on it, and we started rolling. Man, within no time at all, there was a red light behind me, a siren blasting away. It was the MPs. I pulled over, and I reached over and I punched my buddy in the stomach. And I said, start moaning. So he started, oh. About this time, the MPs are up there by the side of the truck. And he said, do you know you were speeding? I said, well, I'm trying to get my buddy to the hospital. I think he's suffering from appendicitis. He looked at me, he said, you're going the wrong way to the hospital. I said, okay. So he said, follow me, which I did. I followed him, boy, I turned my truck around and I was right on his tail, and we went to the flying. He turned on his red light again and siren, and we went straight to the hospital. And he called ahead, and they had the gurney out there. 2 orderlies were ready, and I stopped the truck, and the old buddy got out, and they put him on the gurney, and they whisked him into the emergency room. Well, that was okay. That was great. Except the MPs parked outside the emergency room door to see what was going to happen next. Man, I'm sweating bullets. 15, 20 minutes go by. Finally, they left. Just about that time when my buddy walked out of the emergency room, he had a doctor on one side and a nurse on the other. They were laughing their head off. They thought that was the best story they'd ever heard. And I found out he gave them the full details of what happened. Well, I put him in the truck. We went on back to the compound, crawling back to the compound. And about 2 weeks later, I was motoring around Seoul with a major, and he was in charge of the Corps Theater. So I said, sir, for 3 years in high school, I was in charge of the Corps Theater. Well, no, excuse me, I was in charge of the stage crew. Could you use any kind of talent like that in your Corps Theater? He said, yeah, I said, Joe, I think I could. So he transferred me to the Corps Theater. I turned in my Jeep, and boy, that was the end of transportation right there. Well, while all this was going on, I went to a dance at the NCO club, and I met a girl by the name of Eunice Graham. Well, she liked the way I danced. We were just about inseparable from then on for a full year. Well, her contract was with the Army and with the U.S. government, and she and the colonel were to get property back into the hands of the Koreans that the Japanese had confiscated in the 6 years or so they occupied Korea. We spent a wonderful time together in Korea, and it came time to come home. Her contract was up in December of 1947. My enlistment was up in December of 1947 or thereabouts. And so we ended up coming home on the Hodges together. And that's another whole story. I'm not going to relate that one. But we ended up in California, San Francisco, and she completed her contract. I completed my contract with the U.S. Army, got an honorable discharge. We hopped on an airplane, flew to Chicago. She got on a train and she went back to Atlanta, Georgia. I got on a train and I went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Well, in the months that followed, I completed my high school, got my diploma. I joined the Pipe Fitters Local 420 in Philadelphia, which my father was part of that. And we also went to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which is where we went every summer with the family. They all had about 7 cabins up there, a place called Sylvan Camp. And then I came back to Philadelphia in September, and I was pretty lonely. So I called up Eunice and I said, why don't we get married? She said, okay. So we got married. And we stayed married for 61 years. It was wonderful. Well, you know, I don't want you to remember all the details of what I just said, but there is one thing I do want you to remember, if you can. I looked at my own life in later years, and I could see where I would set up a situation where I'd get in trouble, and then I would find a way out. And I'd get in trouble again, and I'd find a way out. And this seemed to be my lot in life. This is what I did. And all of a sudden it hit me. You know, I'm thinking all of these thoughts that actually manifest and become things. And I'm setting this whole thing up myself. So I changed my mind. And I found out that I could do that. And it was really a life-changing experience for me. And I'm no longer anywhere near the guy I was in Korea. And so, yeah, I know that thoughts are things. And thanks to Ernest Holmes, he said that to learn how to think is to learn how to live. And so I leave that with you, my friends. Buenos dias, everyone. I love you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just stay right there. I'm going to give you this, a little token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you.
Smile over there. And you still have that damn twinkle in your eyes. Don't shake yourself.
Thank you, sir.
Smile. All right. You got everything? Carry on.
I think we'll go around this way.
All right.
Thank you, Joe, for those life lessons and for your service. Folks, we have 2 more speakers, but before I get to that, I'd like to go back, if I may. I always forget something at the outset in the introduction. And with regard to the history of this event, the town hall, this is something that was started a number of years ago by Congressman Seth Moulton, who's a Marine combat veteran, and especially an author and journalist named Christian Younger, as it were. Christian Younger has published several books. You've probably read them or seen the movies, Restrepo, Corrigal, Tribes, and Perfect Storm, which was set in Gloucester. And if you haven't read them, I'd commend those to your reading pleasure. But anyway, what Christian Younger said, and he had served directly with troops since the global war on terrorism started, in a June 2015 Vanity Fair article, Sebastian Younger, I'm sorry, I was calling him Christian. Sebastian Younger highlighted the challenges of post-traumatic stress among veterans. He suggested making every town and city hall in the country available to veterans who want to speak publicly about the war. He believed holding these community forums would return the experience of war to our entire nation rather than just leaving it to the people who were there and who fought. And I think it goes without saying, and I know from personal experience, that nobody ever returns from war unaffected. So you're hearing it firsthand directly from a lot of the people who were here in different parts of our history as a nation. And the next speaker then will be Alan Driscoll. Alan is an Air Force veteran who served in Vietnam. Alan received the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with Valor, which is awarded by the Secretary of the Air Force to numbered units that have distinguished themselves by exceptionally meritorious service or outstanding achievement, and that clearly sets the unit above and apart from similar units. Marksmanship Ribbon, he has the Vietnam Service Medal, Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, Gallantry Cross with Palm. So I would ask Alan Driscoll to please come up, sir.
Well, good morning, all. Good morning. Happy Veterans Day. Hey, this even comes with a hook for the cane. My name's Alan Driscoll, as you've heard. I served in Vietnam for a couple of years, volunteered, broke the cardinal rule of the military, never volunteer for anything. Got into Vietnam. A lot of people, you say Air Force, they think of fighter pilots. They don't realize there's another section with the Air Force called security forces. This is basically the Air Force's infantry. Within that is a group who handle dogs. I was a canine handler in Vietnam. And in those days, unlike today where they're supported by an infantry group, the canines in those days worked by themselves. They were out on the periphery. They worked in the 6-foot-tall elephant grass and then the bamboo thickets with one mandate, and that was to intercept anybody trying to get onto the bases or do damage. And it was not well thought out in my mind, because we were told that once you found them, you made a radio call, told them they're there, and then you engaged them. And there was nothing in there about somebody coming out to get you. You were supposed to go after them, which is what we did. But on Veterans Day, as we recognize our veterans, fortunately both men and women who have served in the service, we managed to miss one group of veterans, and that's our canines. Nobody pays much attention to these guys. They're actually listed as equipment. There were close to 5,000 dogs that served in Vietnam. Less than 100 came back. That's not casualties of war. That's because they were euthanized. They didn't want to spend the effort to bring them back. It kind of annoyed me. They were not good about keeping records. It took me 25 years to find out what happened to my dog. And you may talk about closeness of people within a military unit. There is nothing closer than the dog handler and his dog. You work with them all the time. That's the only real contact you have. I tell people a story. Some people believe me, some don't. There are still days when I'm thinking or I'm writing that I can feel that dog touch my hand. She's that close. Her name was Duchess. She came from Virginia. She was a donation. At that time, people were donating dogs. It was the hangover from the World War II Dogs of Defense. And Duchess wound up being trained down in Texas. I took her over in Vietnam when something happened to a previous handler. One of the things we were told, we had access to the dog's records, but we were told we were never to contact the people who donated the dog. Well, hey, I wrote their address down and I got a hold of them after I got back, and we had a nice conversation back and forth for a number of years. Tell you a ghost story where right after Halloween, one of the last letters that I wrote to the Saffel family who donated the dog came back, said some nice things about me, asked about the dog. I read it once, I put it down, and I lost it. And I kicked myself for close to 20 years of what I did with that. When I moved back to the Cape, the man during the installation of my alarm system found a letter. He said it was just laying on top of one of the rafters, and it was that letter. And I haven't lost it since. But those dogs were a huge part of your life. They still are. When we got back, there were a number of us that got together with a congressman and started to complain about what was happening to the dogs. And he actually got a bill pushed through Clinton's office, which said that they couldn't euthanize the dogs anymore. They had to bring them back and try to make them available for adoption by former handlers or qualified people. That would be people in police departments. So as soon as that got signed, I raised my hand and put in, and I got the first dog out to a civilian in that program. His name was Barrow. His serial number is D134. You got a dog handler, and you ask him what his dog's serial number is, he can spit that out as fast as he can spit out his own serial number. Had him for about 10 years. Great dog. My wife can tell you it was the only German Shepherd she could walk with a leash on one finger. But he had a nasty habit of going back and forth. He'd been trained as a bomb dog, so he's busily looking for things. In Wacoit, there are not too many bombs. What I've been doing since then to try and recognize these dogs is I have a, the hook is next, right? There's somebody back there with a sign that tells you how many minutes you got left. I have started 2 501c3s. One put a National War Dogs Monument down in Virginia. And we're currently working on another one for the dogs involved in the War on Terror that's going to be down at the Army Staff War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We're working pretty hard on it because the people in there are about my age, and unfortunately some of them are dropping away. What would people ask me, would I do it again? And, in a heartbeat. I think any veteran would. So, anyway, I want to thank you for the time. Roll it up? Okay. That's right. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your attention. Have a good day. Thank you, sir.
Alan, just smile right over there at the camera.
Okay.
Here you go, sir.
Got it.
And while Alan's
Thanks, Jim.
standing here, I just want to share another piece of our relationship. Alan and 2 other veterans in Falmouth have formed the Veterans Collaborative, and they are our partner for our Falmouth Food Pantry, and they host it every 2 weeks, partnering with our organization. Alan, I want to thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Al, and I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think any of us regret it, and we'd all do it again if we could, if we were young enough. But anyway, our next and last, but certainly not least speaker is Father William Devine. And Father Devine is U.S. Navy Captain, Chaplain Corps. He has a Combat Action Ribbon, Bronze Star from the Battle of Fallujah, Iraq, and Desert Storm, served in Korea, and really too many expeditionary operations to list here. But suffice it to say, highly decorated and revered within the military. And I was over in Iraq at the same time, it turns out, Father. So thank you for watching over us and taking care of us over there. In any event, Father Devine, please come up and welcome, Father.
Can I take his 4 minutes? And I don't worry too much about if you hold up signs for how many minutes, because my parishioners do it all the time when I give sermons. My dad was a World War II Korea vet. I went to Veterans Day parades with him and was always very proud of him, but had no interest in going into the military. I was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Boston. I was stationed in Dorchester for about 8 years. And my only experience was watching MASH, and who's the priest's name? Now you're dating yourself. Father Mulcahy, you know. So what I want to do this morning is just share two stories, and I want to focus on the relationship a chaplain has with those that he or she is serving. Because I think a lot of times you know what corpsmen do, you know what infantry do, but what does a chaplain do? What does it do? Does it just say services all the time? So I'd like to just share that. I entered the Navy Chaplain Corps, and one of the reasons I wanted to go to the Navy is because it had the opportunity to serve with Marines. My first tour was 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines at Camp Lejeune. I went there, and in the first year, I tell the story to some of my parishioners. The first year I was there, now I was, in Boston, loving life, having a scotch every so often, and now I find myself at Camp Lejeune. Within 4 months, I was sent to in January, northern Wisconsin, to do winter survival training with 1,000 of my best friends, Marines. And so there, it's basically, how do you survive? Now, a chaplain, and although my remarks are going to be focused, my experience with Marines, it's every branch of the service. It's not limited to with myself and the Marines. But I learned how to live, survive, and do exercises in 10 degrees, 20 degrees below zero, living out in the snow. So we spent 3 years at Fort McCoy, northern Wisconsin. I came back from that. 2 months later, I was down in the Honduras doing jungle training and unloading the ships. And then about 6 months after that, I was in Iraq. That's the first year that I was on. I said I'd go in for 5 years. It ended up being 23. The two stories I want to go, one is when we're in Iraq. It was just after Desert Storm. Our battalion was one of the few battalions that did not get called up for Desert Storm. We were doing a MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, in the Mediterranean. All the Marines I was with were bummed out because they weren't going to get to go to war, and they weren't going to get a ribbon. So, it was really tough. We were sailing around the Med. Well, then we got called up to go to Iraq following the war to assist the Kurds that were up in the mountains. And I was up there, and let me back up just a little bit. The Navy Chaplain Corps, Navy chaplains have 4 responsibilities. We provide for our own. As a Catholic priest, I would provide Catholic services, Mass. We facilitate for others. It's my responsibility to make sure that no matter what faith group is in the battalion I'm serving, that I get a chaplain of that faith group so that they too can have services. So provide for our own, facilitate for others, but you care for all. Doesn't matter if they're religious or not religious. You care for all. And the last is advise. You advise the command. So so we got called up, went into Turkey, Salopi, Turkey, which is right on the border of Iraq. And we were going to get called in to go into Iraq. And a chaplain's very simple, operations. The Iraqis, the Kurds were up in the mountains up here, and the Iraqis were here firing on them. And so the Marines were going to come right in the middle and push the Iraqis back. And that's a very simplistic chaplain strategy. So going to push the Iraqis back so that the Kurds could come out of the mountains. So we're on the border of Salopi, Turkey, a battalion, reinforced battalion. The colonel was Colonel Jim Jones, later the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And so we were going to go in. But before the battalion went into Iraq, northern Iraq, we were going to send a reinforced rifle company. And so that was one company. I'm not sure. They had little fast attack vehicles. So it had all these helicopters. Were going to fly them in, and they were going to establish a position. And then the rest of the battalion would come in the next day, cross the bridge. General Jones, Colonel Jones had met with the Iraqi leadership, military, and they'd said, "You are not to come in. We will be against you." And General Jones said, "We're coming anyway." So that night, it was about 5 o'clock in the evening. All the Marines, this reinforced rifle company that was going in to establish a position so that the rest of the battalion could go in, were there. They were all camming up, and the helicopters come in about 11 o'clock that evening, midnight, to fly this reinforced rifle company to establish a position. So I was there talking to the captain, Captain Chris Mulholland, and I said, "Can I go with you?" And he said, "Sure." So, okay, so I got I had uniforms just like you guys do. And so they said, you got to have MREs, meals refusing exit. So you have to have 6 of those all in your pockets, all those cargo pockets. So, and you got to carry water. You have to survive for 6 days. So I got all cammied up. I put all the MREs in my pockets, had water, and I was pretty nervous, and it's all the Marines were pretty nervous, and they're waiting sticks, ready to go on the helicopters about 11 o'clock at night. And I'm pumped. I'm going to go in with them. And then all of a sudden, and the helicopters were there with the propellers, the rotors going, ready to have the Marines board to fly into Iraq to establish this pause. Well, just before the first stick went on, a corporal came over and said, "Father Divine, the colonel wants to see you." I said, "Okay." So, so I went in to the colonel, Tony Cohen, later on General Cohen. I went in, and I'm just going to summarize his words. He said, "Father, what the are you doing out there?" I said, "I'm going to go into Iraq." He said, "No, you're not." And he said, "Who gave you permission?" And I said, "Well," because they put her under the bus, Captain Mulholland. He said, "He doesn't run this battalion. I do." And I said, but Colonel, they're all waiting for me." And a few other nice comments. And then he said something to me, and I've never forgot it. He said, "Father, if you go in and there's resistance and you're taken out, who's going to be the chaplain for these other 1,200 Marines waiting to go in?" I never forgot that. So with tears, and I was all cammied up, I was set to go. So I go back to the sticks, and I told the guys, I was like a little kid, "I can't go. Daddy won't let me go." So I went back, and I said to them, I said, "I'm not going to be able to go." And they're all bummed out. I said, before you go, if you want to say a prayer before you go on, I'd be glad to say a prayer. And boom, they all wanted to say a prayer because they were all really nervous. So I went to each stick. There's probably about 10 helicopters. I went to each stick, a bunch of Marines ready to go on and I said a prayer for them. And I got to the last one, and and by that time they were all, the helicopters were taking off. The last one, I literally was praying with them as they walked up the ramp to go into the helicopter. But Colonel Cohen said to me, he said, "Father, and I went back to him, and I apologized. I said, "Sir, I'm sorry," and I was my first assignment. It was a year into the chaplain course, so I was still learning. And he said, "Chaplain, I promise you, if it's secured and we're safe, you will be with the first group that crosses into Iraq." And I was. He put me right up there, right in the front. And so I went in there, and fortunately, it was safe. And I went in with the first stick, but it taught me a lot. But that's how close I was with those Marines. I was willing to go in with them. It didn't matter if there was going to be some resistance. I lived with them 24/7. I knew these guys, these Marines, and I was willing to go. That was my first tour. The last story I'm going to tell you, the second last story, is towards the end of my career. And I was I was over in Fallujah, and I was the division chaplain at that time, working for General Mattis. And General Mattis was a tremendous leader, and he gave me probably more freedom than one time he said to me, he says, "Father, oh, by the way, I had a Humvee, and the Humvee had a big whip antenna on the back, and I used to use that as a flagpole, and I put the chaplain flag on it. So whenever I'd head to a Marine Corps base, because how would they know that I'm there, in Iraq? I got 1 minute. Okay, I'll end there. No, go ahead. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, I got his 4. And so the flag, Father, drive around Iraq with that flag flying because a big cross on it. And I said, no, General. And the my call sign was Holy Roller because we go around. So we're going into, and I'll try to make this very brief. We're going into Aramati, which is a pretty difficult, challenging spot. And I was in my vehicle with the Protestant chaplain, Brian Weigelt, and we were going through what they did. We stopped before we went into Iraq, before we went into Ramadi, and they sent out drones ahead of us to detonate the IEDs. And so the word came back, they were all detonated. So we went in, and we were going through Ramadi. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was dead silence. And you knew that something was going to happen. You just knew. It was absolutely, it was eerie. Nobody was out. And usually at that time in Iraq, people would be opening up their shops. Long story short, we're halfway through there, and the vehicle behind mine was hit with went over an IED, and it detonated. And I was absolutely petrified. And the Marines came up, the Marines knew just what to do, and so they went in, they took care of the casualties, and myself and Chaplain Weigelt, you know, I never was, it was the first time in Iraq that I did 3 tours, first time in Iraq that I was absolutely petrified, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I was scared out of my wits. And then 2 young Marines came up, and they said, they said, chaplains, because it was Brian and myself, they said, thank you for being here with us. You give us courage. Please don't ever leave us. And I made a promise that day, at that time, from being absolutely petrified and never wanting to go out on the roads again, and I said, these Marines, I love them. And if I have to die, I'm willing to die for them. And the rest is history. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Tallest and shortest, right here.
Thank you, Father. Now you know where the line comes. It's best to beg forgiveness than sometimes to ask permission. And we learned that in the seminary. That's where that came from. That's an old trait. You know, what Bill doesn't talk about is Boston and Massachusetts have a long history of serving in the military with Catholic priests in the Archdiocese of Boston. When I was on our reserves, we had 15 priests from the Archdiocese of Boston on active duty. Just amazing. And it's a terrible priest shortage, as you can well imagine. And, you know, Bill shares a long line of George Pucciarelli. Pooch was at 83, the Beirut barracks bombing. He was on the front cover of a magazine. Your staff sergeant knows him very well yet. Father Divine, Father Bill Kennedy. He and I did some things you can't talk about in Quantico with HMX-1. We went places in the air in D.C. that you're not allowed to go. I can tell, I think statute of limitations has gone by on that. But last but not least, I want to thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Bob in a second, but those that work for me know I never pass up an opportunity to talk about our organization and our mission and our vision. It's because of each of you that we do what we do. We have the inspiration to do what we do. Lastly, at the end, I'd like the junior Marines to come up. We're going to provide each of you challenge coins. Young Marines. You're not sure what a challenge coin is yet. Ask the gunny when you're 21 what a challenge coin really means and what's its purpose. But I'm going to give you, hopefully, your first challenge coin, because if you do decide to go in and become members of the military, ultimately you'll become one of us, which is a veteran. And I want to, you guys look absolutely sharp and awesome. And I want to again thank Hyannis Elks. You are great partners with us. We love you folks tremendously. You're wonderful. I acknowledge one more board of director member. Bill Burke just joined us. Bill is the past president of our organization and really an integral piece of what we do and a great confidant and counsel for me as Executive Director. Bill, good to see you. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mr. Vice President. And the young Marines, before you leave, make sure you get that challenge coin for me, okay? And last but not least, I want to thank the technology. We've been live streaming this event for the first time. So we've been on live for homebound folks who have been able to join us today, not only through Channel 18 here in Barnstable, but also through live stream capabilities. I want to thank the town of Barnstable for that. It's amazing what technology does. Last but not least, my team, you're amazing. If I do one thing right, is I really think I make really great hires, and I really believe that I've done that, and I've done it well. If I'm not remembered for anything else, is that I hired the right people that are better at what I am at. They know more than I, and you always hire the best, and I think I really have. Thank you.
Just a few final comments, if I may, in regard to the young Marines. You know, I enlisted when I was 17 years old, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. College, law school, everything else came because of that, in my opinion. So I've been blessed to have a great career, and I'm very proud of all of you. I wasn't much bigger than you folks. Anyway, Father, I can assure you that the Marines love you too and appreciate you being there. And similarly, and we all appreciate, the veterans appreciate the respect and gratitude that's shown by this turnout, and we're forever grateful to all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful day, rest of your weekend.